What happens when a self-proclaimed neighborhood enforcer picks a fight with the wrong person? Well, let's just say that this Karen is about to learn the hard way that some people don't just follow the law. They are the law. A new resident becomes her latest target. But what she doesn't realize is that she's not just harassing any neighbor. She's tangled with an FBI agent who's not about to let her get away with it. Ever had a run-in with an overzealous HOA? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Natalie Reed barely had time to pull into her driveway before she spotted the first sign of trouble. A woman in her mid-50s with stiff, over-dyed blonde hair and a permanent scowl stood at the edge of the sidewalk, arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was holding herself together. Next to her, a man with a beard pushing against a navy polo shirt squinted toward the house, as if sizing up a new threat. Natalie sighed, shifting the gear into park. She wasn't even fully moved in yet. The moving truck hadn't even made it. And yet there they were, the local self-appointed neighborhood watch, practically salivating at the opportunity to interrogate a new resident. She stepped out of her car, adjusting her blazer out of habit, though she had dressed casually today in jeans and a soft gray sweater. The woman wasted no time. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, coated with that distinct tone that white suburban women often use when they felt inconvenienced. Natalie turned, raising a polite eyebrow. "Can I help you?" The woman looked her up and down, taking in her posture, her outfit, the confident way she held herself. Something about Natalie already irritated her. "I'm Linda Spencer," she announced as if that should mean something. "This is Tom Richards. We run the Maplewood Falls HOA. Natalie kept her expression neutral. She had already read up on the HOA before she moved in. Voluntary, meaning they had no actual legal authority, just a bunch of entitled people who liked to pretend they did. "Nice to meet you," Natalie said evenly. Tom cleared his throat, stepping forward slightly. He adjusted the fake badge clip to his belt, something he had clearly ordered online to make himself feel important. "We just wanted to introduce ourselves and make sure you're aware of the community rules," Linda added, her smile tight. Natalie nodded. "I read up on the neighborhood before moving here. I know the HOA is voluntary." Linda's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Well, it's strongly encouraged. We like to maintain a certain standard here. To keep the neighborhood safe and orderly." There was that little hesitation, the subtle emphasis on words that were meant to mean something else entirely. Natalie had dealt with people like this before, many times. She inhaled deeply, already tired. "I appreciate the concern, but I'll be handling my own property. Thanks." Tom huffed, stepping even closer, trying to loom. "You new here, Miss Reed? And what exactly do you do for work?" There was the real question, the one they had been dying to ask. "Why do you need to know that?" she asked smoothly. Linda scoffed as if the question itself was ridiculous. "Ridiculous? Well, we like to know who's moving into the neighborhood for safety reasons." Tom nodded, smirking. "A lot of strange folks these days. You can't be too careful." Natalie let a pause settle between them. She let them sit in their own discomfort in the silence that stretched just long enough for their unease to creep in. Then she smiled. "I work in law enforcement." That was technically true. Linda's lips pressed together in clear dissatisfaction. Tom shifted, clearly thrown off by the answer, but trying not to let it show. "Well," Linda said, regaining her footing, "since you're new, you probably don't know about our yard regulations. We have strict rules on lawn height and proper landscaping, and I notice your grass looks a little unkempt." Natalie blinked. "I just moved in. The moving truck hasn't even arrived yet." "Exactly," Linda said, as if that somehow helped her argument. "And we don't want to start off on the wrong foot, do we? Best to handle things early." Natalie gave a dry chuckle. "So you're telling me I need to mow my lawn before I even unpack my boxes?" Tom's chest puffed up, sensing the resistance. "We're just letting you know the rules. If you're going to be part of this community, you need to follow them." Natalie folded her arms. "Let me ask you something. What happens if I don't?" Linda blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Excuse me?" Natalie tilted her head, keeping her tone light. "If I don't mow my lawn by your deadline, what happens?" Tom's smirk returned. "We issue a fine. And if I don't pay the fine?" Linda's nostrils flared. Then we'll be forced to take further action. Like what? Now, they were really uncomfortable because the truth was they had no actual power. They relied on intimidation, on bluffing their way into control. You're being awfully difficult, Linda muttered, shifting her weight. I'm just asking questions. Tom opened his mouth to say something, but a new voice cut in from the sidewalk. Everything all right here? The three of them turned to see a man in a police uniform, arms crossed as he approached. Miguel Santos, local officer. Linda's demeanor immediately shifted. Her posture straightened, and she plastered on her best concerned neighbor face. Officer Santos, she greeted. We were just letting our new neighbor know about our HOA policies. Miguel glanced between them, then at Natalie. You okay? Natalie gave a small nod. We were just having a chat. Miguel turned his attention back to Linda and Tom, expression unreadable. You know the HOA isn't legally enforceable, right? Linda bristled. We have a duty to uphold the values of this neighborhood. Miguel nodded, unconvinced. Sure, just remember harassment is also against the law. Tom visibly clenched his jaw. Linda pursed her lips but forced a tight smile. Of course, just a friendly visit, she said. Then she turned to Natalie. We'll be in touch. And with that, they walked off, stiff with frustration. Miguel shook his head. They always do this to new folks. Natalie exhaled, watching them disappear. Down the sidewalk. Yeah, I got that impression. Miguel smirked. Something tells me they picked the wrong person to mess with this time. Natalie smiled back. Oh, they definitely did. And they had no idea just how badly they'd screwed up. Natalie Reed wasn't the type to let people rattle her, but as she stood on her front porch sipping her coffee the next morning, watching Linda Spencer and Tom Richards patrol the street in their ridiculous golf cart with flashing lights, she had to admit this was getting irritating fast. She had dealt with criminals, corrupt politicians, and hostile foreign agents, but nothing in her years of law enforcement had prepared her for the petty tyranny of Maplewood Falls' self-anointed HOA enforcers. The cart slowed as it approached her house. She took another sip of coffee. Here we go. Tom revved the tiny electric engine dramatically, making sure he got her attention. Linda, as usual, had her clipboard in hand, her lips pursed like she was about to deliver a statewide mandate instead of whatever nonsense they had cooked up overnight. Good morning, Miss Reed. Natalie didn't even bother faking a smile. Linda. Tom. Linda's gaze swept over her porch, taking the unopened mail still sitting in the mailbox, the trash bin positioned at an angle near the curb, and the patch of grass that by her rigid standards was half an inch too long. We need to have a word, Linda announced, stepping off the cart. Natalie exhaled slowly, setting her mug down on the railing. Let me guess, another violation? Tom hopped off the cart, puffing out his chest. Multiple violations, actually. We already gave you a verbal warning about the lawn, and now we're seeing additional infractions, such as... Linda flipped a page dramatically. For one, you left your trash bin at an improper angle. That's an obstruction of the aesthetic value of the street. Natalie blinked. An improper angle? Linda nodded, completely serious. Yes, according to Maplewood Falls community standards, all trash bins must be aligned with the curb at a 90 degrees angle. Yours is at, she squinted at her clipboard, approximately 82 degrees. Natalie stared. You measure my trash can? Tom crossed his arms. It's about consistency. Natalie ran a hand down her face. Right, of course. Linda wasn't done. And let's not forget about the uncollected mail. Natalie raised an eyebrow. What about it? Linda tapped the clipboard. It's been sitting in your mailbox for 2 days. That's against HOA guidelines. You have rules about mail retrieval. Abandoned mail makes the neighborhood look neglected. It gives off an undesirable image. Natalie stared at them for a long moment, then slowly exhaled. Okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go inside, finish my coffee, and go about my day. And you two are going to get back in your little cart and drive away before I report you for harassment. Tom let out a mocking laugh. Harassment? We're just enforcing community rules. Linda nodded. If you refuse to comply, we'll be forced to issue an official notice, Natalie. Natalie narrowed her eyes. An official notice, Tom? Tom grinned. Fine. Natalie crossed her arms. And if I don't pay? Linda's lips curled upward. Then we'll escalate it. Tom leaned in slightly. We can file a report with the county office. It could lead to legal action. Natalie's patience snapped. She took a step closer. And what law exactly am I breaking? Tom faltered for half a second, but Linda, ever persistent, stood her ground. It's about compliance. The HOA has a right to enforce. No, it doesn't. Natalie's voice was even, but there was an edge now. Linda's smile twitched. Natalie took another step forward. The HOA in this neighborhood is voluntary. You don't have the legal authority to issue fines. You certainly don't have a right to demand that I comply with your nonsense rules about trash bins and mail retrieval. Tom's face darkened. You might want to watch your attitude. Natalie's expression didn't change. Or what? Silence. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Look, we're just trying to maintain order. You might be new here, but we take these things seriously. Natalie gave them both a long, slow look. Then she smiled, and that seemed to unnerve them more than anything else. You two have a nice day now, she said, voice cool and dismissive. She turned, walking back toward her door, leaving them standing there, their authority crumbling around them. Linda looked like she wanted to say something else, but for once, she didn't. Tom muttered under his breath and stormed back to the cart. Linda hesitated, then followed. Natalie watched on the porch as they drove off, muttering to each other in frustration. She knew this wasn't over. They weren't the type to let things go. And for some reason, they were determined to make an enemy out of her, which was a shame because they had no idea who they were messing with. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts, then pressed a button. A few rings later, a voice answered. Natalie, what's up? I need a background check, she said, eyes still on the golf cart vanishing down the street. The voice on the other end chuckled. Someone bothering you already? Natalie smirked. You could say that. She had dealt with power-hungry bureaucrats before, and she was about to make sure this was the last time Linda Spencer and Tom Richards tried to intimidate anyone in this town again. Because they weren't the law, she was Natalie Reed. She wasn't surprised when things escalated. She had expected it. People like Linda Spencer and Tom Richards didn't handle rejection well, especially when it came from someone they couldn't control. What had surprised her, however, was how quickly they moved. It started with the letters. Thin white envelopes slid neatly into her mailbox, each stamped with the official Maplewood Falls HOA insignia, which upon closer inspection was nothing more than a stock image of a tree with the words, "Preserving Community Values" underneath. Each letter contained warnings about new violations. Failure to adhere to lawn maintenance standards, unauthorized garbage bin placement is prohibited. Street parking of guest vehicles and excessive porch lighting after dusk are also issues. That last one actually made her laugh. Excessive porch lighting? What were they going to do? Write her up for owning a working front door. She tossed the letters into a drawer without opening the rest. Then came the reports. Linda and Tom began filing complaints with the city under her name, falsely claiming that she was engaging in unneighborly behavior. Loud music, disturbing the peace, and operating an unregistered business from her home. She received 2 separate visits from local inspectors, one for a permit violation she didn't commit, and the other for potential zoning infractions that had no legal basis whatsoever. Each time, she greeted the city officials with a polite smile and handed them her own documentation, which, of course, showed that she was in complete compliance. They left embarrassed, mumbling about misfiled reports. But she knew the game Linda and Tom were playing. She had seen this exact kind of power trip before. It was the same entitlement she had dealt with in Washington, the same desperate need for control. The only difference was that these 2 clowns weren't playing with government resources. They were playing with Amazon-purchased badges and a misplaced sense of authority. Still, it was becoming a nuisance. She was more than capable of handling it. But what about other people in the neighborhood? How many others have been bullied into compliance because they didn't have the means or knowledge to fight back? She decided to find out. So she started talking to the neighbors. At first, most of them were hesitant, avoiding eye contact, lowering their voices, glancing around as if someone might be listening. That alone told her everything she needed to know. The HOA had created an atmosphere of fear. They kept increasing the fines every month. One woman admitted, shifting uncomfortably on her porch, that at first it was just small things. Grass a little too high, trash cans left out too long. But then they started making things up. An elderly man chimed in. They tried to evict me last year, said my fence was non-compliant. I checked. There was nothing wrong with it, but they still sent legal threats. A younger couple who had only lived there for 6 months revealed that Linda and Tom had forced them to pay over $2,000 in community upkeep fees that weren't even in the official bylaws. None of them had ever challenged it because they didn't think they could. That was intentional. That was how people like Linda and Tom operated. They intimidated, they bullied, and most of all, they bluffed. She could see it in their faces. The exhaustion of constantly trying to comply with rules that kept changing. The defeat of knowing that no matter what they did, it would never be enough. The worst part? Some of them had started to believe it was their fault. That maybe if they just tried harder if they were better neighbors. If they just stayed quiet, it would all go away. That's what Linda and Tom wanted them to think. Natalie took a slow breath, steadying her frustration. This wasn't just annoying anymore. This was a shakedown, and it was about to end. That night, she made some calls. She didn't need FBI resources for this. She just needed public records. What she found didn't surprise her. Linda and Tom had been running the scam for years, filing bogus liens on properties, pocketing fake HOA fines, using fear tactics to push out homeowners they didn't like, usually people of color, single parents, or elderly residents who couldn't fight back. They weren't just playing HOA cops. They were running a full-blown racketeering operation. By the time she closed her laptop, she had enough evidence to take them down. And the best part? She wasn't going to file a report. She wasn't going to write a complaint. She was going to let them dig their own graves. The next morning, she made sure to mow her lawn, not because of the HOA, but because she wanted them to think she was giving in. Sure enough, less than an hour later, Linda and Tom rolled up in their stupid golf cart. Tom smirked, leaning back like he had already won. See, that wasn't so hard, was it? Natalie played along. Guess I just needed some motivation, Linda beamed. It's good to have cooperative neighbors. Natalie nodded. Absolutely. Then she casually pulled out a thick folder from under her arm and handed it to them. Linda frowned, taking it. What's this, Doc? Linda flipped through the pages, her expression slowly twisting into confusion. See, I was curious about those fees you keep issuing, Natalie continued. So I did a little digging. Turns out the Maplewood Falls HOA is registered as a voluntary association. That means you have zero legal authority to collect fines or enforce policies that aren't explicitly agreed upon by all homeowners. Tom's smirk was gone. Linda's fingers clenched around the paper. This is ridiculous. Natalie shrugged. Is it? Because I also found financial records showing that those community maintenance fees you've been collecting, yeah, they never made it to the city's infrastructure budget. Tom's face paled. Natalie took a step closer, lowering her voice. That means you've been embezzling. Linda swallowed. You don't understand. Oh, I do, Natalie cut in. And the IRS will too. Silence. Natalie smiled. Now here's what's going to happen. She plucked the folder back from Linda's trembling hands. You're going to leave me alone. You're going to stop harassing this neighborhood. And if I find out you've issued one more fake violation, I'll personally make sure you're wearing an orange jumpsuit before the year is out. She let the weight of her words settle. Then she smiled wider. Now who's ready to comply? Tom's jaw tightened. Linda forced a stiff nod. Good, Natalie said, turning back toward her house. She had just declared war, and Linda and Tom, they were already losing. Natalie Reed knew people like Linda Spencer and Tom Richards wouldn't back down without a fight. They had spent years controlling this neighborhood, bending the rules to fit their personal biases, intimidating people into compliance. She had handed them a warning, given them a chance to walk away quietly, but they didn't take it. Instead, they did what desperate people always did when they felt power slipping through their fingers. They doubled down. The next morning, the block was on lockdown. Orange construction cones lined the street, and handwritten deeder signs redirected traffic. Right at the center of it all, Tom and Linda sat in their golf cart, now outfitted with red and blue flashing emergency lights, stopping every single car that tried to pass. Natalie leaned against her porch railing, sipping her coffee as she watched the circus unfold. She had expected something petty, maybe another bogus fine or some last-minute attempt to file a false police report, but this was insanity. Tom held up a hand as an elderly woman in a sedan rolled her window down. "Sorry, ma'am, but we're conducting a security checkpoint. Got to make sure all vehicles belong to verified residents." The woman blinked. "I've lived here for 30 years. Linda stepped in. "Then you shouldn't mind showing us your ID." The woman scoffed. "There's no such thing." Linda smiled tightly. "There is now." Natalie set her coffee down. That was enough. She stepped off her porch, walking calmly toward them. Heads turned as she approached, neighbors peeking through curtains, standing on porches, watching with barely concealed curiosity. Tom noticed her first, his jaw locked, but he didn't flinch. Linda, however, smirked like she had already won. "Morning, Miss Reed," she called, crossing her arms. "I assume you're here to cooperate this time." Natalie glanced around. "So this is what we're doing now." Tom spread his arms. "Neighborhood safety. With all the recent disturbances, we thought it best to implement a checkpoint system, just making sure everyone belongs here." Natalie smiled slow and deliberate. "And who gave you the authority to do that?" Linda lifted her chin. "The Homeowners Association." Natalie nodded. "Right. The same HOA that isn't actually legally recognized by the city." A flicker of irritation crossed Linda's face, but she kept her smile. "It's about community standards. You should know that, given your background." Natalie arched a brow. "My background?" Linda's smirk widened. "Oh, we know." Tom chuckled. "Did some digging, Reed. Turns out you used to work for the government. Law enforcement, right? FBI. Natalie didn't blink. "Something like that." Linda stepped closer. "Guess that makes both of us officers of the law." Natalie exhaled through her nose. "You're comparing your fake HOA badge to my actual federal credentials?" Tom laughed. "Hey, the way we see it, we're in charge here. You're just another resident." Linda nodded. "And residents follow the rules." Natalie let the silence stretch. Then she reached into her pocket. Tom stiffened. Linda took a half step back. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to them. Linda frowned. "What's this?" Natalie smiled. "A court order." Linda's eyes widened as she unfolded it. Tom leaned in, reading over her shoulder. Natalie continued. "See, while you two were busy playing cops, I was making a few calls, and it turns out the city has been looking into your activities for a while now. So I made sure to speed up the process." Tom's face drained a color. Linda's hands started trembling. "You're lying," she whispered. Natalie shrugged. "Then feel free to call your lawyer, but I'll save you some time. The judge already signed off on it." Linda flipped through the pages, her breath quickening. No, this isn't legal." "Oh, but it is," Natalie said smoothly. "That document officially dissolves the Maplewood Falls HOA effective immediately." Tom stepped forward, his voice borderline frantic. "You can't do that." Natalie tilted her head. "Oh, and one more thing." She reached into her other pocket. This time, she pulled out her real badge. The moment she flashed it, a ripple of whispers spread through the watching neighbors. Linda staggered backward, as if she had been physically hit. Tom's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Natalie snapped the badge shut. Surprise. Linda was shaking now. You tricked us." Natalie chuckled. "No, Linda, you tricked yourself." Tom whirled around to see flashing lights approaching from the main road. 2 marked police cars, 3 unmarked SUVs, and a city official. The officer stepped out first, heading straight for the golf cart. "Tom Richards?" Tom swallowed hard. "Yeah. You're under arrest for impersonating a law enforcement officer." The gasps from the crowd were almost deafening. Linda whipped around, eyes wide. The official stepped forward, handing her a final notice. "Ma'am, You and Mr. Richards are being sued by the city for the unlawful collection of fraudulent fines and misuse of homeowner funds. Linda's mouth fell open. This isn't happening. Tom tried to run, but one of the officers grabbed him immediately. Linda shook her head, turning to Natalie, desperate now. Please, you can't let them. Natalie raised a hand. You tried to bully me. You tried to frame me. You even tried to run your little scam one last time. She took a step closer. But you made one big mistake. Linda swallowed. What? Natalie smiled. You messed with the wrong person. The officers pulled Tom toward a patrol car as he shouted in protest. Linda stood frozen, clutching the useless clipboard, watching as her entire empire crumbled. Natalie turned, meeting the eyes of the neighbors for the first time. They weren't afraid. They looked relieved. In the end, Karen and her lackey found out exactly what happens when you try to strong-arm the wrong person. Not only was their little HOA scheme shut down for good, but their reputations, and possibly their futures, were left in ruins. Meanwhile, Natalie finally got the peace she moved in for in the neighborhood. Well, let's just say it's a lot quieter without Karen's clipboard patrol. Have you ever had to stand up to a power-hungry HOA? Share your stories in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more wild tales of justice served.